Hi, everybody. So last time we looked at the structure of DNA, and I told you that you needed to know the structure of DNA in order to understand how it is that DNA makes you look the way you do, and that's true. But you also need to know the structure of another set of molecules before I can explain to you how DNA actually makes you look the way you do. So we now have the structure of DNA as a double helix with the A's and T's matching and the C's and G's matching. It can unwind and wind back up. We have to put that aside for a moment, and we have to now look at RNA and those structures of RNA. And then once we have all that, I'll be able to explain next time how it is that DNA actually makes you look the way you do. So we'll start with RNA. Now, unlike DNA, there's one kind. There's DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, that's it. RNA, we have three types. We have something called messenger RNA, or mRNA, and by convention, the M is lowercase and the RNA is uppercase, and so you want to write it that way. We have transfer RNA, tRNA, and again, the T is small and the RNA is big, capital. And then we have rRNA, and I just mentioned that for context, but we won't be talking about rRNA at all. So that's it. That's the only time I'll mention it. So we're really going to focus on 1 and 2, on mRNA and tRNA. Those two molecules with DNA are important for explaining how it is that the genes you inherit from your parents make you look the way they do. So we have to focus on mRNA and tRNA. So let's start with what mRNA and tRNA have in common. Okay, they are nucleic acids just like DNA, and their structure, fortunately, is very similar to DNA, so that now that we know DNA structure, RNA shouldn't be too tough. In fact, it's exactly the same, but there are three differences. So it's exactly the same except for three things. One, DNA is double-stranded. RNA is single-stranded. So where you have the two strands wrapped around each other and they can unwind and wind up, RNA is just the one. There's nothing on the other side. Okay, so it's single-stranded. Two, they are made of nucleotides. So that strand is made of nucleotides. The circle, the pentagon, the rectangle, the circle, the pentagon, the rectangle, right? So it's just single strand of nucleotides, just like DNA was a double strand of nucleotides. This is a single strand of nucleotides. And they're made of the circle, which is what? A phosphate group, and a pentagon. Now in DNA, that pentagon was a sugar, which it is still. It's still a sugar, but in this case, instead of deoxyribose, where DNA gets its name, deoxyribonucleic acid. This is a different sugar. And RNA, ribonucleic acid, gets its name from it. So you should guess the name of the sugar is ribose. Unlike DNA, where it's deoxyribose. And then finally we have the rectangle, and that is a nitrogenous base, a base that contains nitrogen. So it really is very, very similar to DNA. We just have a single strand of them, and we have a different sugar. And then there's a third difference. And if you'll recall, there are 4 bases in DNA. There are also 4 bases in RNA. So an entire strand of RNA is only made up of a combination of those 4 bases. In DNA, A matches with T, C matches with G. In RNA, we have A, we have C, we have G, we just don't have T. T instead is a U. So we have A, G, C, and U. There's no T. So DNA and RNA, both nucleic acids, both made of strands of nucleotides, both have circles, pentagons, and rectangles, but RNA is only single-stranded while DNA is double-stranded wrapped around each other. RNA has ribose, DNA has deoxyribose, and finally, instead of T, which is in DNA, there's a U in RNA. A matches with U, just as it did with T, and C matches with G. You should be asking yourself at this moment, if you're really thinking about this, you should be saying, wait, Ms. Cohen-Norris, that makes no sense. How can you tell me that A matches with U and C matches with G? Why does that make no sense? remember, A matches with T and C with G in DNA because there are two strands wrapped around each other, so they match, right? So if there's an A over here, there's a T here, they match. But I just told you that RNA is single-stranded. So if it has A and then U and then C and then G, why would it be bonding to anything? There is no anything over here. It's gone. It's a single strand. So that should be a little weird. But here's the thing. This single strand can wrap up and fold so that a base, say right here on my fingertips, right there, could have an A and there could be a U here and it folds and bonds that way. We also have RNA bonding to DNA, which we'll talk about next time. So in fact, just like A matches with T in DNA and C matches with G, A goes with U in RNA and C goes with G. Okay, so we have, remember, three different kinds, and we're only going to talk about two, mRNA and tRNA. mRNA, messenger RNA, is a long single strand. It's just a strand, single strand, and it's straight. Its shape is straight. And every three bases on it is called a codon. So if we have one long strand of bases, if you take a look right here, this really is a strand where you'd have the circle and the pentagon and then the rectangle, the circle, a pentagon, and a rectangle. So this is just a long chain of nucleotides. And so we have 12 nucleotides here, 3 A's, 3 U's, 3 C's, 3 G's. We have 4 codons, 1, AAA, 2, UUU, 3, CCC, and 4, GGG. So mRNA is a straight strand, and every 3 bases on the strand is called codon. On the other hand, tRNA is shaped very differently. So instead of one long strand, the strand is wrapped up and folded up into basically a T shape. It's not actually what it's called tRNA. We'll talk about what's tRNA next time, but you can remember it that way because it looks kind of like a T. It's folded. So where we have this strand right here, mRNA would have just been straight down. And if we have a little A right here, then that means on the other side we have a what? A U. If over here is a C, and on the other side is a G. So we have all of these base pairs because this one single strand of RNA is folded up in this funny shape. At the bottom are 3 bases that hang off, and they are called the anticodon. And that does have something to do with the codon on the mRNA, and we'll talk about that when we talk about how DNA, mRNA, and tRNA interact with each other, which we'll do next time. So those are the 2 kinds of mRNA that you need to know, mRNA and tRNA. The differences between RNA and DNA. RNA is double-stranded, DNA is double-stranded, RNA is single-stranded. DNA has deoxyribose, RNA has ribose, and instead of T, RNA has U.